Well, welcome. It's great to see so many of you showing up on my screen. We are gathered for the second work in progress meeting of the Vermont's Child Care and Early Childhood Education System Advisory Committee. So excited to give some updates. Certainly, Elliot and Asha and their team have been really busy talking with folks. So we are excited to get that update and to get your input. So I'm just going to do a quick roll call so that we can get a sense of who's here. And then I'm going to hand it over to Nasha. So let's see. Do we have Cheryl Wilcox? Saw here.
Hi, everyone.
Yep.
Here. DMH, happy to be here till 2. I'm double booked, so I'll be hopping off quietly at 2.
Okay. I'm going to move through our state partners first. Ken Jones from ACCD. Didn't see. Elisa Stahlberg from Department of Health. You just see. Okay. Wendy Trafton. I saw just join.
I am here. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. Kate Rogers. Okay.
She might be a couple minutes late, but she's planning on, oh, there she is.
Yeah,
she's
I'm here. Thank you.
Great.
Couldn't
Thank
unmute.
you. Kendall Smith from the governor's office. Not yet. Okay. I'm going to move to our, let's see, Kate Northey from UVM.
I'm here.
Hi, Kate. Allie Richards from Let's Grow Kids. Not yet. Heather Boucher from AOE. Nope. Miranda Gray from CDD.
Hi, Beth.
Hey, Miranda. Representative Jessica Brumstead.
I'm here, thanks.
Hey, Jessica. Representative Teresa Wood.
I'm here, thank you.
Great, hi. Senator Ginny Lyons. Okay. Moving on, Sherry Carlson from Let's Grow Kids.
Hi, Beth.
Hey, Nicole Dubuque from CDD.
Hi Beth, I'm here.
Great. Linda January from Otter Creek.
Hi, I'm here.
Hey, hey Linda. Jen Severance from Let's Go Kids. Shelly Henson sends her regrets. Diane Nichols Fleming also said she might be late. Wendy Cunningham.
I'm here.
Hey, Wendy. Renee Kelly, Head Start Collab office.
Present.
Hey, Renee. Lori Metcalf.
Hey.
Northshire. Hey, Lori.
Hi, Beth.
Becky Millard from Northern Lights sends her regrets. Elena Gustafson from the Community Loan Fund. Patty Smith from Head Start. I saw Patty.
Yes, hello.
Great, thank you. Janet McLaughlin from BTA YC.
Yes. Hi, Beth. Hi, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks. Sonia Raymond from Apple Tree. Okay. Rose Morrison from CCB Northern Lights. Danielle Harris from the YMCA. Matt Levin from the Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance.
Here.
Hi, Matt. Crystal Michaud from CDD.
I'm here. Thanks.
Hey, Crystal. Michelle Treya from NCSS. Okay, Rebecca Bishop from Bennington County Head Start. Cynthia Green from Shelburne Farms, Vermont Feed.
Hi, Beth. I'm here. Hi, everyone.
Hey, Cynthia. Amy Murphy from AOE.
Yep. Hi, everybody.
Awesome. Kim Kaiser from Turl. Okay, Eddie Gale from A.D. Henderson Foundation.
Yes, here.
Hey, Eddie. Jim Trimarchi from Southwestern Vermont Medical Center. Bill Bonsignore from Rutland City Public Schools.
Hi, Beth. Hi, everybody.
Okay, Belle. Do we have Keith Williams from CDD, CIS team?
Yes, hello, Beth.
Great. Katie McCarthy from AOE. Katerina Lysias from the AHS office, Secretary's office. Lynn Robbins from CDD.
Here.
Awesome. And who else? BBF team. We had Morgan, who introduced in the chat. Anna is here on the call, and Beth Drzansky. Who am I missing? Please make an introduction.
I missed my top of the
Hi, Allie.
alphabet.
Thank you.
Hi, good to see you. Hi, everyone.
Okay, awesome. Any others?
Hi, I'm Leslie Bergeron with CDD.
Great, thank you, Leslie. Okay, and I see Ken just coming in. Awesome. Well, we are so thankful to have you here. So I'm going to hand it over to Nasha.
Thanks. Beth, is it helpful if I share the PowerPoint from my screen?
Either way, I have it up if you want me to do it.
That'd be great.
Okay. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So thank you all. And between our last conversation and this conversation, I've gotten the opportunity to speak to a lot of you one-on-one and in group settings, and really have appreciated the time and the opportunity to connect. So I'm just going to start, if you can go to the next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process and where we are, and then talk a little bit about planned next steps, and go into greater detail. And then hand it off to Elliot, who's going to speak a little bit more about our next planned meeting with you all. And then we'll have opportunities for question and discussion as well. Great. So as you know, that the goals of our system analysis were to examine systems that govern and administer childcare and early childhood education, make recommendations for Vermont's approaches to improve the functionality of services and systems, and be sort of thoughtful looking about the future of the work that you all have been doing really diligently and so hard together. And we've been really focused on thinking about, what would make the system work better for kids and for families. And how are sort of the different roles that you all hold, as well as the others that you interact with and sort of represent, how do they interact with the system, what's working and not, what could be better, and had really wide-ranging and varied conversations with you all to help make sure that we're reaching the goals of the system analysis, and make sure that the product that we ultimately produce represents all three of these things. So we've had lots of interviews with state and local stakeholders. We've had a lot of one-on-one conversations. We've had a few opportunities for like small group conversation, which have actually been really fun. They've been an opportunity to sort of see how small the state of Vermont really is and how well you all sort of already know each other, and can sort of talk together and knowledgeably about the system. We've started with a list that Building Bright Futures provided. In conversations with folks, it has come up frequently, like, have you talked to so-and-so, or you may want to talk to the person, or this perspective may be valuable for you all to include. That has been so helpful. If following you think of more people that we should be talking to, if there are more referrals that we should be sort of seeking out or adding to the list, we really want to make sure we're having those conversations, because they are, again, just really productive and foundational to the report that we're producing, and to our understanding, our knowledge, and our sort of recommendations that we make to you all about how this works in Vermont and how it can work better. So we have done sort of first round conversations with folks to really get a sense of like, what's your role again, like what's working or not, what are the things that you want to elevate for us in this initial round of conversation. We really want to make sure that this is continued conversations, that those are not one-off conversations, but rather an opportunity for us to start and then come back to you all with updates, with sort of first answers, with thoughts and hypotheses to test out with you and continue to iterate on before we sort of get to a final report. So what will happen next? So we've been taking a lot of notes in all of these conversations, and we're coming to a point of like some themes emerging across the various conversations with different sort of folks at different levels. People may be talking about the same things differently, but we're definitely seeing a few themes emerge. So we'll distill those to describe the current state in Vermont, and really sort of focus on the places where there's been most consensus or most people sort of went these topics most frequently in our conversations. Those themes, again, Vermont's plan or work that you all have done to think about Vermont's current and future state. And we'll highlight the major ideas that we think may be most important to the process moving forward. So again, this is like, these conversations have been a starting point for us. We want to take all of the information that we have, put it together for you, and come back to you all with some first ideas, get your feedback, and come back again and again, so that we can make sure that throughout this process, we're iterating with you all on our understanding and on our recommendations for the future. So I'm going to hand it to Elliot to talk a little bit more about what happens in February.
Thanks, Nasha. And again, I'll just echo Nasha in that we were just sort of chatting that it's great to see everybody here, both in terms of how many people are here and how many people remain committed to this work, and also how many of you we've now had a chance to talk to already. And we know that we're going to continue to do that and over the course of the coming months. So when we look ahead, right, again, as we think about the role of the advisory committee, right, a lot of your responsibility is to make sure that we're on track. And so today's meeting is a little more process oriented, but that starting with our next work in progress meeting, we're going to really want to dive into the substance. So what we're going to do at that next meeting is, again, as Nasha said, we're going to share out our sense of the current state. And we are not going to be trying to make any recommendations as to what happens next. We're just going to be trying to get the group's consensus of like, here's what's actually happening now. Building on the major themes that we've heard from multiple people, and again, comparing those to what the state has articulated as its goals through the strategic plan and other reports that you've put out. We are going to share it with this group, but we hope that we will get the chance to share it with other groups as well. One of those groups will be the Building Bright Futures regional councils. If there are other stakeholder groups that we should be talking to, we would welcome those referrals. So again, we are going to try to share that widely, get feedback, get input, because after we share our sense of the current state, we're going to start getting into, okay, based on the current state and based where you want to go, here are some of the key questions and choices that we see coming down the pike. And so before we do that, we want to hear from as many people as possible about what their sense of the current state is. We also, through that, will welcome individual outreach. I don't think we're going to be scheduling as many interviews in that phase as we have in this phase. We're going to try and do some of it in group conversation, but that if folks want to have individual conversations, we would be happy to have them. So on the next slide, based on what we hear in the February meeting and all of the, oh wait, no, I'm a slide ahead. Beth, I'm sorry, back. Yeah, okay. Yeah, actually even back one further, I'm sorry. So based on what we get from the February meeting and our subsequent conversations, we're going to start framing up what we see as the major decisions that the state faces. That'll be what we talk about in April. And you'll be asked to share your thoughts on that. And again, if there are other venues that we should be presenting to, other audiences that need to hear this, we're happy to share those too. And again, all of those conversations are meant to be both sort of us sharing some thoughts and then, on those in particular, getting feedback on what people think of them. Because we're going to put out some trade-offs, right? And those of you we talked to directly know that that's our frame. And we've said that at the last advisory committee meeting. There is no magical right answer sitting out there. There are only hard choices with pros and cons. And we are going to start identifying some of the key, what we see as the key choices, some of the pros and cons. And so we will welcome both any questions you think we've missed, but also additional pros and cons that you think we've missed. So the options that we present, again, are going to be meant to frame up the conversations that are going to happen as we move into the end of the process after April. We're going to be very mindful in that of thinking about the role of the state. And so on the next slide, right, we have heard from a lot of people about the value of community level support, community level infrastructure. And of course, in a rural state with a lot of small communities, it can be challenging to build capacity there. That is certainly one of the things we will talk about, but that a big part of what we're going to be talking about is how the state relates to regional and local structures. So that's going to be a key part of that conversation. But we will also be focused on, for the state to fulfill its role, what does it need to do successfully and how might it best be organized to do that? So again, those are the conversations to come. We're doing it in that order because we want to keep each conversation from getting too messy, and also build on what we learned, frankly. I mean, we've learned so much in the conversations that we've had so far, and know that each of these rounds of conversation will yield new information that can be really valuable. So one sub-theme of this is about data, which I think is Beth, I think we've got a slide for that too. People want better data about what's going on in the system. We've heard that loud and clear. When we come back and talk to the advisory committee, we're going to talk about data systems and how those can contribute to successful administration of the system. We are working on that more deeply on a parallel track. I know some of you here will be involved in that as well. There's a focus group that's looking at data evaluation, and that group's already met once and is going to meet again in January. And our hope is that the final recommendations we put forward will include some concrete recommendations on what the state can do to strengthen its data use and data capacity. Again, if you look at managing the system on an ongoing basis, that feels like a really important part of it, and it's one that's come up in a lot of conversations. Thank you, Morgan, for putting in the chat the more specific reference to what I'm talking about. So again, we welcome feedback on that as well. As with everything else, if Build Back Better passes, that changes the dynamics substantially. And so, you know, we may well know that by the next meeting. We might not, like, things happen slowly in Washington. So we will obviously be keeping an eye on that. And looking at what possibilities that presents if it does in fact happen. All right, so to sum up, at the next meeting, we will be sharing with you our summation of Vermont's current state. Again, comparing it to the desired state as articulated in reports that many of you have worked on over the years. We want to make sure to honor that work. In April, we're going to come back, talk about the key questions that need resolution and frame up some of the trade-offs. We're not in this group going to try to get to actual answers of those questions, but we are going to try to hone in and get responses and see where the temperature of the group is. And again, if there are pros and cons that we have missed through our work, we'll want to get those on the table as well. After that, again, we're going to be really working in greater depth to gauge the reaction of the field to those potential trade-offs and some of those key choices, and then finalize recommendations for next steps to move forward. And obviously, a lot of those next steps would have to be taken by people on this group. So that's why this process is structured as it is, right? We want to get to the end and have folks here feeling like, even if it's not exactly what they might have drawn up at the beginning or even close to the end, that it's something that they would see as better for the state and progress, and that they would see themselves as able to work together to implement the recommendations. We did not want to, so again, because we are still early in the process and we haven't had a chance to fully sort through our substantive conclusions, we wanted to use this time today to make sure that everybody was on board with what those next steps are going to be and how we're going to go about doing that. That is less sexy and fun than the conversations we're going to have starting in early 2022. But it did seem important as we get into that work to make sure that everybody knows what's coming. Nobody likes surprises, you know, and to have this time and space today to get reactions to that, get any thoughts you have about things you might want us to do differently. But that's really what we just covered is really all we wanted to get to today in terms of sort of interacting with you and getting the next steps. And we're hoping that the rest of the time can be your reactions and responses, any questions you have, and that we can end the meeting with, you know, hopefully unanimous or close there to consensus that this process makes sense going forward. I will stop there and welcome any comments or feedback. Agreement is okay, by the way.
So can I ask a question? This is Jessica Brumstead.
Please.
You spoke a lot about data systems, data evaluation, the focus group. There's already a focus group going on, and having a better data infrastructure. I just wondered if you could be a little bit clear on what data are. I mean, there's so much going on, and I want to be sure that I understand what the specific of the data. What are we talking here?
Yes, that's a great question. What we are largely talking about is having what's referred to nationally as an early childhood integrated data system that is able to take data about multiple programs within the system and provide a more holistic sense of how the system is working overall. And that requires drawing data from what are now multiple operating systems and both having the technical ability to produce integrated information from those and the analytic capacity to make sense of the data that's being produced. There are also issues that we've uncovered in our conversations about each of those individual operating data systems, right? So, you know, there are, you know, I know that for example, at Agency of Human Services, there's a project going on right now to update their data platform. That is relevant to that, but we're focused less on the sort of individual operating systems that the agencies are managing and more on how do you knit the data together to give groups like this and you know, and other folks who are looking systemically information about how the system as a whole is functioning. Is that helpful?
Well, so data, you're talking about data about our childcare centers, data about our kids, data about our enrollment versus attendance. You know, I'm just trying to get a sense of what, instead of just if you had to replace that word data with something else, what would the words be?
Sure, it would be, well, I don't know if I could replace it with one word, but to your point, it is both information about children and the experiences they're having, about providers and the services they're able to provide, and about the workforce, right? The professionals who are engaged in the work of early childhood, and also about how those things interact.
Okay.
And the most basic, yeah, and like the most basic data that most states focus on at the beginning, and again, which I get the sense is where folks here are really interested in, is just supply and demand, right? Like how many kids are getting which services and what is the likely demand in a given community for those services.
Right, and in our world, we constantly have legislators that are working on all different topics. So their first question is going to be, okay, so what kind of data are we talking about? So this helps. I want to be sure that what I think it is what you all think it is. So.
And this is more
from BBF. I just wanted to let folks know, I can send you the public document that outlines the overview of the Data and Evaluation Committee's charge, which is identifying some of those top data priorities, the indicators across every sector that we want to be tackling over the next 5 years. And I think it would be helpful for folks to have that written in front of them to be able to reference.
I see Cynthia's question in the chat. Matt, I know you've got your hand up, so we'll come to you in a second. Will it include an analysis or include work to identify data gaps? That's a little deeper than our scope goes. I think what we will probably end up doing is recommending some specific next steps that would address some of those issues. You know, to your point, in general, this work will need to involve identification of data gaps. Oh, and Morgan's already got a chunk of that done. So there you go. But that in general, the way, if you're actually developing an early childhood integrated data system, you start by identifying what are our priority use cases, right? What are the things that are most important to us that we need to know? And again, supply and demand is almost always the first question that folks want to answer, in part because it's so useful to every other question you want to answer. Then you map out what data you have, right? Which again, some of that work's clearly already been done. And that once you've done those two things, you start mapping, okay, to answer the questions we want to answer, what are our gaps? What resources do we have? How do we bring those together? And then start designing a system that can sort of pull it all together and allow for that analysis. All right, Matt, you've been patient. Thank you.
No problem. So Elliot, you won't be surprised that I'm going to ask a question that's a little bit pointed. So I would say that I know most of the folks who are on this, who are in this meeting. Hello, everyone. And I think we probably all think of ourselves at least as pretty important people, if not very important people. And we're all used to having an opportunity in various processes to be involved in decision-making and direction setting at a pretty early time in a process. We're also used to being told at various points, look, we're asking for your opinion, but things are actually pretty well set. So, you know, have your feedback with that in mind. So this is a rhetorical question, really, or maybe an observation. I think it'll be helpful when we get the materials in February, the next round, to be pretty transparent about, so is this really a draft? And you know, we could take it all apart and put it together again, or is this actually pretty far along? And so, you know, take that into account. And I'm not asking for an answer to that at all. I'm just, as I listen to your explanation of the process and I look around the array of who's here, and I think about how all of us interact with projects, I think, you know, we all know each other. So just let us know, you know, and we'll deal with it. And if we have complaints, you know, we'll call up Morgan and we'll complain. Oh, sorry, you're just taking a drink, Morgan. You know, we'll call up Morgan and we'll complain. I mean, you know, that's cool. But this is a really impressive group of people. I have so much respect for everyone here. I think it makes a lot of sense to just be pretty straight up about where we are with things. And then we'll all have good expectations. We can all move forward. And I didn't prepare this. I'm just thinking, as I listened to your presentation, I was looking around. It occurred to me that let's just be transparent about this as opposed to being coy about it, you know?
Yeah, that's a great flag. And well, I'll tell you this, what we present to you is going to be largely what you told us, right? And it'll be anonymized, right? And we'll have distilled some trends that cut across what people said, but like, we're not making any of this up, right? So I think what you get in February, you know, and just to project ahead what I expect, and we'll be more transparent about this at the time, what you get in February is going to be relatively well-baked, right? Because we're looking at what is the current state of play, and that it will be based on all of these interviews. And again, there may be subtleties that we missed or things that seeing it all put together inspire people to say, but our hope is that most of what's on that chart, no one is going to be like, how did you come up with that, right? That's going to change a little bit as we get further down the road, right? And I see hands going up, so that's awesome. As we get further down the road, it's really going to be less baked in the sense that we're just going to be asking questions and saying, look, like, if what you actually want is X, here are the ways you might achieve that and the pros and cons of each, right? Because what we're trying to do is make a match between what you say you want and what you're actually doing. So those questions will be a lot more open-ended, but what you get in February hopefully will be pretty well baked. And again, that's not to say that there won't be changes to it. I'm sure there will be, but because it's what we've collected from all of you, hopefully it will be pretty comprehensive and you know, everyone will recognize it going in. I want to get to Dimitri's question in the chat, which came in before folks had their hands raised. Another form of data gap is measuring experience among those that can't or don't access the system. Can you speak to that? That's a good question. That's the kind of thing that I think we would want to have as part of a conversation about use cases, right? That one of the things we might want to know is what is the experience of folks that aren't accessing the system. My guess is that that's the kind of thing where that would require additional data collection than what's going on right now, which is possible, but I would think, unless someone disagrees, that that's not the kind of thing where we can just sort of take the data that we already have, combine it and cut it in different ways and be able to answer that question. So it's a great question, and exactly the kind of thing that if there is a sort of focused conversation about data system design and use cases, that would feed into that. Diane, you were next in the queue.
Yeah, my question is, it's almost like a data gap, but not quite. So I'm wondering if anyone has mapped out where the interviewees are located. I'm wondering if the whole state will be represented, and especially, and not just the 12 district offices, but you know, the kind of the corners of the state that might not be captured. I think it would be critical to be sure that there's representation of the different regions.
That's a great flag. We have not geo-mapped our list, but we can go back and do that. I'm at least at the beginning, I think a lot, you know, the map's going to skew toward the capital, right? Like that a lot of folks have been in state government, but that as we go forward, making sure we're covering different parts of the state. And that's also something we can pay attention to going forward as we talk to regional groups, right? If there's any groups that we don't get in this first round, the time between February and April is essentially sort of looking at some of the same questions, and we can still get folks in there. And again, we can do individual outreach in January and February as well to sort of get some of those voices in. So it's a good flag. Caitlin.
Hi, so I have a methods question. So you were talking, and I think maybe Nash was actually talking about it, how you're going to present major themes that are coming up across conversations. Major themes sometimes leads people to assume agreement. And you mentioned kind of frequency of when things would be coming up. And so as we're talking about equity of voices, and I'm thinking about, do you have predetermined from a coding language, like buckets of data that you're already thinking you're going to be sharing with us, or are you really coming up with those in ways based on what you're hearing, in which case, how are you handling issues of disagreement? I'd like to know more about the major themes kind of crafting.
Yeah, that's a great question. And timely, because Nasha and I have a meeting to dig into that later this week. So so some of this, to Matt's earlier point, this answer is not fully baked because we are still working on it. I will say we don't have like a predetermined set of categories, right? And that there is some amount, if we're being honest, there's some amount of sort of impressionism that goes into this, right? That it's not, you know, because as Nasha said, there's a lot of issues that like everybody talks about, but they talk about it a little differently. I do think, though, to your point, that one of the things we will do is where there is disagreement, point that out, right? So we may say, look, you know, we talked to a lot of people who had an opinion on this subject and the opinions varied and here's what they were, right? So part of what we're going to try to reflect back in the current state is like, here's the stuff that we consistently heard everybody pointing in the same direction. And here's the stuff where people are all over the place. Both of those are useful knowledge for this group, right? one finds sometimes in these processes that there are certain truths that everybody holds to themselves, but no one has said out loud. And it's possible that we will come to some things that like everybody kind of knew it, but no one had just sort of said it to a large group and gotten nodding agreement about. I don't know, right? Not having had the history that all you do, but that might happen. There might also be places where everyone thought there was agreement, and what we've surfaced is there isn't, right? So I think what's our obligation is to do is to give you a sense of the sort of temperature of what we're saying, right? And that where there are places where everybody we spoke to agreed to say that, and where there was widely diverging opinion to say that, and where there was a vast majority saying one thing, but a few holdouts like say that too, right? So we will both identify the themes and give you, in a way that protects everybody's anonymity, some sense of sort of what the temperature was on that. Does that help?
I think too, also just to add, I think sometimes, there may be varying levels of specifics that folks get into. So there may be consensus on a direction, even if the specifics differ. And we'll be sure to point out those kinds of consensus as well.
In that sense, Caitlin, I think one of the things that's important is like, and picking up on Nasha's point about the details, like the point of the exercise in February is not to get complete agreement about every grain of like actual truth. It's to get enough consensus about what's going on that we can start framing up the key questions we need to ask. And that consensus could be, X issue is really important and we have no consensus about it, right? Like that's an environmental condition that we can take into account. So part of what we're going to be looking to the group to do is to say, oh yeah, like you said that everybody agrees and that rings true, or you said that everybody disagrees and that rings true. That's probably enough, right? Like we're not trying to resolve those debates, because honestly, part of what our work will be is in areas where there is disagreement, say, look, like here's an area where there's disagreement. Here are some paths to potentially resolving that. Allie, you were next up.
Great. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I just really disagree, Matt, with you on that one. I guess, see it from the other point of view, which is I feel like this has been unprecedented levels of input and listening. If I see this as the evolutionary process of first, remember the early childhood action plan, where before it was the action plan, it was the roadmap, and then the action plan, and then the Appreciative Inquiry Summit, the Blue Ribbon Commission, the think tank, the most recent CDD AOE merger debate that was in the legislature that many of us weren't, a part of, and watching that play out and how that played out. So for me, I honestly, having these conversations and talking to folks who are also having these conversations with Elliot, Nasha, from my personal perspective, having followed every single one of those, evolutionary processes, which by the way, I have never seen in any other policy development area before, I've never felt more comfortable, because obviously we need something here. It has come up and have been built upon in every single one of those processes, but no one person or group has the answer. And so having these conversations, for me, I've actually been incredibly calmed down. This is one of the things that has been the hardest part of sort of the work I've been involved in for the last 10 years. And so having an external expert, seeing how Nasha and Elliot have brought their own experience in this work and how they're comprehensively listening to so many folks, actually has made me feel more comfortable about where we are on this, than ever before, frankly. What I'm most concerned about is like, for example, the communication I'm hearing at the top of this call and at other sort of forums is about, I think, telling folks we're doing something here. Like, hello, we're doing something really important here. Engage and pay attention. Because my biggest concern is that we, first of all, don't find sort of the courage to collectively act on what the recommendations are. And the other big concern that I have is that key decision makers do not engage in this process or do not respect this process and do something completely different that, doesn't take into consideration what, again, I see over here being sort of this like very evolutionary process that we've all built upon in many ways, personally and organizationally. So, you know, and the way I'm hearing it structured is that this is what we've heard, if you want these outcomes, you should do these things. You know what I mean? So it's a little bit more of like a menu as well. That's why I'm most thinking about, gosh, it's really important to hone in on the communication about letting people know now the importance of this, what this really is, how comprehensive it has been over the years. And so that we really make sure we don't come to a point where we're not ready to move on the recommendations. And, you know, we have key decision makers ignoring or dismissing this really important body of work. So I'm just, of course, I'm thinking ahead a little bit here. Sorry. So if I'm zooming too far in the process, but you know, I'm immediately jumping to that. And mostly it's because I'm just so comfortable with the conversations I've heard and the materials I've seen so far vis-a-vis the process. So anyway, and really, truly, sorry to blow smoke, but I'm really impressed with the level of and quality, Elliot and Nasha, that you've been showing as consultants in this way. This is a really difficult process. So I've been really pleased with what I've seen so far.
Thank you, Matt. I saw your hand go up and your name was used in debate. So if you want to jump in, I have some thoughts and response as well. Okay.
So I would apologize if for some reason my comment was meant to be negative at all. I don't disagree with anything really that you said. So just to be clear, I'm not expressing discomfort at all. In fact, if anything, I'm suggesting ways to continue to have the level of comfort that you're describing, that this is really important and we are all engaged, right? And there is so much great conversation. So just wanting to make sure that as we go through the future steps, everyone's knows what's going on and knows where the status of the discussion is and how well formed things are. And Elliot, I think the response to my observation was clarifying, and I feel very comfortable. So Elliot, I'm sorry if for some reason anyone else thought that I was being negative or critical. That's why I prefaced it by saying, Elliot, I'm going to ask one of those questions. This is me. Look, I'm paid to worry. You all know that. I say that all the time. And sometimes that means I come across as far more negative than I really mean to be. So no, nothing negative here. Lots of support for this, Ellie. I'm with you. I think this is a great process, and I
took it in that spirit. I took it in that spirit, and you know, anyone who's not worrying is not paying attention, right? So like, it's important to do that. I do think, Allie, to your point, you know, again, like we're not the decision makers. All we can do is sort of frame up decisions. But one of the things that we will have to include in that, and this is something that's come up in a number of conversations, is the cost of the status quo, right? Like change is hard, and that, you know, we weren't brought in to just say, oh yeah, like everything's great, like do it the same way forever, right? So we're going to end up having to recommend changes. And that part of what you hear from us is a sense that if we're going to recommend changes, we want those changes to be really deeply grounded in the actual experiences of the folks who live in the system, that we want to be really clear about realistically the pros and cons of things, because again, like there's nothing that solves all the problems, and it's going to require some prioritization to identify which problems you want to focus on and how you're going to go about solving them. And that there is a sense of urgency that will be needed to make that happen, where the cost of not doing it will have to be on the table. And one of the things we've heard from a few folks, which again, like I say this as a small sample size, so you know, in Matt's taxonomy, this is not, or Caitlin's taxonomy, this is not like a consensus of the group. But one thing we've heard from a few people is that there is at times in Vermont policy a reluctance to sort of just throw down and make really hard choices if that's going to gore somebody's ox. And we are not here to gore any particular oxes, but like we are going to have to frame up some of those hard choices, including the cost of not making them, right? And so we see that as an important part of our role and look forward to trying to facilitate the conversation in that spirit, with a belief that given the level of energy and enthusiasm we've seen from folks in Vermont, that there's a lot of opportunity, and that if we can get to a consensus about what would be best moving forward, that the possibilities are really outstanding. Renee, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Elliot. Just wanted to kind of hop in and share kind of what I'm hearing, and comfortable with the process and what you've outlined. I think it's a great approach. I think one of the things to be thinking about is when you do put forward that menu of options, like these are some things you can do and these are the pros and the cons. I think to Matt's point, just being really clear about the who right? Like if there are decisions to be made or changes in practice and policy, being really clear about who is the decision maker within those changes, and if there are recommendations or lessons learned from other states about the stakeholder process or engagement with making those decisions. Because I think that's, you know, it's great that we all work collectively together, but then sometimes I feel like it's a little who's on first, because we're all doing the systems work and we're like, well, is it our job? It can't just be us, it's actually them. And the them are saying, well, it's a little bit us, but it's also you. So I think within this process, it's really important at the end to, in addition to here are the issues or the priorities and here are the choices and the pros and cons, here are the entities that are the decision makers or are going, you know, and whatever that stakeholder process is. I just think that helps bring about some clarity, because I hear what you're saying, Matt. At some points, like folks are sharing, we want your feedback, but we're just listening and we're not really going to do anything with it. So we don't want to get to that point. I think we really want to be clear about whose wheelhouse making this decision is, or what's some of the, you know, what are the recommendations around how that entity or those entities then get additional stakeholder input if necessary. But it's great to have timelines and options, but naming the who is really important. So we don't all like skirt by in that collective, like everyone's pointing to someone else saying, oh, but it's your job, not our job.
So Renee, that is a great point, and not only will I agree with it in total, I'll add to it. I think what we probably need to do is not only identify the decision makers, which again, the likelihood is that there's going to be at least some components of this that would require legislative action, right? So that, and it's great to have some legislators in this group, but that also to be as clear as we can about how particular scenarios might impact different people in the system, right? So, you know, because even if folks are not the ultimate decision maker, if they're impacted by it, they need to think through, you know, hey, like, what does this mean to me? How much do I want to advocate for or against it? And that we, you know, we can't know that with precision. And P.S., we can also assume that everybody will read whatever we write, and immediately, if we don't say explicitly what we think is going to happen to their category, project that, right? But that what we can potentially do is unpack some of the assumptions, and again, to the extent that there's evidence from other states, the experiences, and say, look, if you do X, here's what it means for the Head Start community. Here's what it means for childcare. Here's what it means for school-based pre-K. And give people a sense of what we're thinking, so that if they were thinking something completely different, they can challenge our assumptions. Because I think that's going to be really important to the decision-making, and frankly, for the governor's office and legislature, who are ultimately going to be responsible for deciding on some of these changes, you would hope they would want to know that. Other thoughts and questions?
Can I just add on to what you said there, Elliot? I feel like you all providing that level of context of these are the implications for XYZ would be really helpful, because I think a lot of our issues have been, we all think we're being so straightforward, you know, I think to the earlier conversation too, is part of what was being, you know, sort of brought to the table. And there's a sometimes assumption that people are speaking in code. Like, I'm saying this, and what I mean by that is not what I'm saying, but that I don't like mixed delivery, or that I want everything to do this, or I want, you know, like this group to benefit, right? So when it's sometimes is the case and sometimes it's not. So I actually feel like you decoding that with that context within your recommendations as an external party would be really, really helpful, especially for the decision makers like the governor's office and legislators, as you mentioned.
Yeah, well, and I think that speaks to the approach we're taking of pros and cons. Like, there will be times where the pros and cons are not uniformly distributed, right? And that to some degree, like in some, you know, there are some scenarios where some groups may come out a little better than other groups, and we've just got to be upfront about that. And, you know, that includes sort of who bears the cost of the current system, but identifying, like, you know, this path gives these people 85% of what they want, and these people 40% of what they want, and these other people, like, would be 20% worse off, right? I think, again, we can't identify it with that level of precision, but that general direction and what we think is going into it, we will try to do. And we will, by the way, be presenting in all likelihood some options that we aren't recommending, but that we just think are important to have as consideration for people to look at. Because again, like, we're not the ones who bear the brunt of this one way or the other. So all we can do is sort of put on as many reasonable options as we can and help facilitate a conversation about why why the state might choose one or more of them in different cases. Other thoughts and questions? Nasha, if you're, it looks like you're saying something, but you're on mute.
Oh, no, I'm good. Sorry.
Sorry. Well, that is mostly what we had hoped to accomplish today. And again, we certainly welcome individual outreach at any time. Which and most of you know how to find us, since many of you have spoken to one or both of us already. We will be, the meeting in February will start getting into a lot more of the difficult substance. And we will try to share out materials in advance. I'm not sure how far in advance, but in advance, so that you have at least some time to process that before you come in. Again, with the recognition that we're not trying to use that meeting to get to any final answers or consensus. We're trying to use that meeting to kick off a period of a few weeks where we're going to be taking the basic information we're sharing it widely and seeking feedback on it in a way that we will process and bring back to you in April. So with that said, we may speak to some of you again before the end of the year, but for those of you who don't, we hope you get a great holiday season and have a wonderful, happy new year. We can go ahead and look forward to continuing to follow up with you this year and into the next.
Thank you all so much for the opportunities that we've had to talk. I've just been so appreciative of how generous people have been with their time. And the conversations have just been really great. Thank you again for all of your participation.
Agreed.
Great.
Take care, everyone.
We'll see you soon. Thank you.